The purpose of this video is to just get an overview of the digestive system. As we begin to look at organic molecules, these are molecules that we typically get from the foods that we eat. Proteins, carbohydrates, fats. Even though our body makes those, to get them, we have to eat foods. We break those foods down, then we take the raw materials and reassemble the carbohydrates, fats, lipids, and even the nucleic acids that we find in our body. So take a look at some of these digestive system organs, and let's see what you might know or recognize. So for example, A is pointing to the mouth, also the tongue in the mouth and teeth. B is pointing to the saliva glands. C is the stomach. D is the pancreas. E is the large intestine. F is the small intestine. G is the gallbladder. H is the esophagus. When you think of digestion, kind of picture an assembly line. Because in an assembly line, each individual has a role, and they do that part to make the final product. But for digestion, think of it as a disassembly line. So instead of putting pieces together, we're going to go in the opposite direction of taking the pieces apart. So we're going to start with a hamburger, but we're going to wind up with proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. So if a carbohydrate is the finished product, we are going to break it down into simple sugars, the small sugars like glucose and fructose. If the final product is a protein, we're going to break it down into its smaller parts, in this case, amino acids. If the final product is a lipid, we're going to break it down into its smaller parts, in this case, fatty acids. The digestive system consists of digestive organs, where food actually passes through those organs, as well as accessory organs, which help digestion, but food does not pass through them. So here are the digestive organs in order, and some of the accessory organs that help aid digestion along the way. When we first start to eat, we take a bite of our food, and we start to chew it. That process is called physical digestion, the physical change of food. So mashing, grinding, cutting, slicing, that's all physical changes. Mixing. Chemical changes are when the food starts changing chemically. Chemical bonds are being made and broken. So that's going to happen later in our digestive tract. And the saliva does have a little role of chemical digestion, but mostly in our mouth it's going to be physical digestion, mostly done by the teeth and tongue, also the hard and soft palate on the roof of our mouth. If you take a look at our picture here, letter C is pointing to incisors. Incisors are really good for biting. They're sharp across the front edge. They're really good for biting. A is pointing to a canine. Canines are really good for piercing, the sharp kind of side teeth for piercing. B is pointing to premolars, and premolars are really good for slicing food up. D is pointing to the molars. Molars are kind of flat surfaced teeth that are really good for grinding. So of our teeth, it's the molars that are the most common. We have more molars than any other teeth. Whenever we swallow food, we have some things that keep the food out of the respiratory system. We have what hangs down the back of our throat, the uvula, that keeps it from our nasal cavity. And we have the epiglottis, which keeps the food from going down the trachea. When food goes down the esophagus, we don't control it anymore. So after we swallow, the food's on its own. The way it moves through our digestive tract is by these rhythmic contractions of smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is muscle we don't control. Those contractions are called peristalsis. It happens automatically. When food enters our stomach, it begins to be digested by the stomach acids. So this is where we're going to get a significant amount of chemical digestion, but we're also going to still be getting a significant amount of physical digestion, a little bit of both. The stomach is kind of a J shape. You can see here it has different compartments to it, but as food travels through the esophagus, it enters the stomach, and then a sphincter muscle seals that compartment so the food cannot very easily go back up through the esophagus. Now, the stomach is made of a muscle, so it can stretch. And when we eat large meals, it stretches considerably. The length of time that food spends in the stomach varies. Sometimes it spends a short amount of time. For example, carbohydrate digestion in the stomach does not take very long, usually 1 to 2 hours. But protein digestion takes much longer, 3 to 4. Also, if you eat more food, it tends to stay in the stomach longer. So the more you eat, the more time it spends in the stomach. You'll notice in this picture, the stomach has muscles in different layers, and those muscles are running in different directions, so the stomach can mix and churn and twist the food up. Occasionally, the stomach contents will leak into the esophagus. We normally call that heartburn because that stomach acid is burning the esophagus and it's leaking through that esophageal sphincter. After leaving the stomach, the food enters the small intestine. The small intestine is about 10 feet long if you're living, and once that muscle relaxes, 21 feet when you're dead. Primarily, the small intestine's job is going to be chemical digestion. This is where most of the chemical digestion will take place. You notice that the lining to the small intestine looks like an accordion folds, where it creates a lot of surface area as food passes through there to be contacted by the chemicals as well as to be able to be absorbed into the body. Food is absorbed through little tiny projections that are all over the small intestine called villi. As food enters the villi, it needs to be broken down into the smallest parts possible, like fatty acids, amino acids, or monosaccharides, very simple sugars. Here's an example of carbohydrates being broken down into the small intestine. Here's an example of proteins being broken down to amino acids. And finally, fats being broken down. Let's look at the accessory organs. The liver is a major accessory organ. It has a lot of work to do, even though food doesn't go through the liver. One of the things that the liver does is it creates bile, which it stores in the gallbladder that gets injected into the small intestine. It filters our blood, it detoxifies our body, it helps to make amino acids, proteins, and vitamins, it regulates our blood sugar, so it's got a lot of jobs to do. If we drink alcohol in excess, those toxins from the alcohol begin to kill the liver cells. Those dead liver cells then become scar tissue, and the liver ceases to function in that area. The pancreas sits right above the stomach. It's another accessory organ. And one of the things that it does is excretes the chemicals that are responsible for the chemical digestion happening in the small intestine. One of the significant things it secretes is sodium bicarbonate. Sodium bicarbonate acts as a buffer. So as very acidic food is leaving the stomach and entering the small intestine, that bicarbonate will help neutralize those acids. Picture of the large intestine and some of the parts to the large intestine. So after food is digested and absorbed, most of what goes into the large intestine is going to be eliminated. The primary job of the large intestine is to get any water back. The first thing we see here is the appendix. So this little tiny branch off of the large intestine. That's A. Then we have the ascending colon, transverse colon, and then the descending colon. And here, part B, we have the rectum, and C is the anus. And that's going to wrap up our quick tour of the digestive system.